Well, good morning, everybody. All right, it is Wednesday morning. I'm actually here in Loveland, Colorado. Yesterday, I got the chance to fly over this relatively deep low that spread quite a bit of moisture pretty far to the north. But I need to talk to you about the northward extent of that moisture, who did not receive moisture from either this one or the exiting low that's taking off into parts of the northeast. And we're going to compare that to the upcoming forecast and continue to discuss these areas that have gotten very, very dry compared to areas that have been quite saturated. Now, while you continue to look at this incredible setup across the country with a pair of cutoff lows, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the video. After discussing the near-term forecast, we're going to walk into some of the new long-range content I think about, maybe the way the end of May may shape up by comparing the subseasonal forecast from the GFS and from the European model. I want to talk to you about some stuff Matt brought up yesterday with what's going on with our Pacific Ocean temperatures specifically and how they might control this upcoming summer's weather patterns and why they're influencing the long-range models. And we're going to dive deep into something called the Pacific Meridional Mode. That's something we've talked about in the past, but we need to talk about it again. And then I'll finish with just a quick kind of global update of things. So let's come back to this animation here, because as the sun was trying to set, there are a few things about this that I thought were quite important. One, the storms in Florida. Florida's been extremely dry, so to see some moisture getting into Florida, even if it's coming in by the way of deep convection, is going to be important. This upper level, though, is going to be a part of a system that's going to drive very wet conditions into the southeast United States. And there are pockets of drought in the southeast United States that these rains are going to be too much, honestly, and it's going to be very problematic for the planting progress in this area. Speaking of planting progress, we're going to talk a lot about the Midwest and what's going to be happening there. I do have some colder risks I'm going to talk about for the Great Lakes states and surrounding area that's out there in the longer range forecast as well. And then we'll take a look at what's going on in the West, too, including some more snow possibly for our highest elevations. But at the end of this animation, as we see the deep line of storms going through parts of eastern Texas, setting up a flooding situation, which is going on right now in parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley, I did take note of some of the wildfire activity that's going on down here in Mexico. And I wanted just to bring you up to speed again that over the last 3 months, we're still, since 1981, seeing pockets of Mexico in exceptional drought. And we need to be just aware of what this is going to mean going into the summer season. To be honest, it appears, if things kind of trend in the way we're currently thinking, that we could get into a very active midsummer monsoonal situation in this region. We're going to kind of make a story of that here in just a few minutes. But over the next 10 days, this is how things are shaping up. This is the European model, this morning's run, 10-day forecast looking at precipitation anomalies. And I'll tell you what's going on here in just a few moments, because I think there's going to be a bit of an interesting pattern shift that's going to take place closer to mid-month. But the flooding situation that's going to be taking place across parts of the southeast is going to be something to watch, given how dry that it's been there. But we got wet conditions running up the East Coast. We continue to keep more open windows throughout big sections of the Midwest. And this region definitely needs to have a time frame here of drier conditions where they can get some of the floodwaters, out. Speaking of floods, just to go have a look at this real quick, I'll just take you to the all hazards map. We do have the flood watches that are still here, but just take a look. All of these polygons you see in through here that are kind of outlined, these are areas that are in flood warning right now. So I'm here, and there's snow in the mountains. The Rockies look beautiful. I can see snowpack in them right now, just from my view from Loveland. And we do have places here that have winter storm warning, winter weather advisory. And we just need to be aware of the backside of this low coming through that region. Okay, quick look at the next 7 days. Now, I'm going to talk about what's going on in the Northwest in a few moments. I'm going to focus right now. We got this drier swath that's moving into Texas, Oklahoma, definitely needed. But the rains that are coming into the Southeast, just to kind of focus on one area that's extremely wet, you can see that the WPC forecast is putting down. And remember, the WPC is kind of a curated product from the National Weather Service, okay? So it's not a specific model like the ECMWF or GFS. It's a blended feature that they come up with that generally over the next 7 days I find to be a good representation of the precipitation pattern. So you see they've got some places in through here that are looking at 4 to 7 inches of total rainfall. We need to be aware of what this is going to be because of how dry things have been there as of late. So for example, just look over the last 72 hours, right? Here this system comes through this region, all right? And this is just an extended, longer, drier stretch of weather in parts of the Southeast. So, we're going corn, soybeans, cotton, peanuts. There's a lot of crops that are down here, including peaches and other things, that just to name a few. Unlike where I live in Illinois, where around me is almost exclusively corn and soybeans, down south, the variety of crop is much greater. So what are we looking at here? Last 72 hours of total accumulated precip. There's one low that's moving to the northeast. A lot of rainfall in the northeast. The second cutoff low and its influence coming through here. Now I noticed something on this particular map that I want to just stress here. As you look throughout kind of the high plains coming off of the mountains here, very, very wet conditions, except there's a sharp divide in this that cannot be ignored. And what I mean by that is, yeah, we had some moisture that got into parts of western Nebraska, but the state of Nebraska has been exceptionally dry this spring. Just to show you the latest 40 centimeter or 16-inch soil moisture now. Remember, this is a profile, 0 to 40 centimeters. This is one of our driest spots in the central United States. The soils are saturated here, but you come out of parts of eastern Colorado, sections of Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, but all centered around Nebraska's very, very dry conditions. You can also see throughout parts of northern Illinois. Again, just talking with folks in southern Illinois, a good friend of mine, Matt Bennett down here, he's like, give me a break, man. We got to shut this thing off so I can get a crop planted. I know many of you watch in northern Illinois, and you've been leaving comments like, hey, some folks don't have tile running right now. It's so dry in this area. Take a look how wet it's been here from parts of Ohio into Pennsylvania, New York, into the Northeast. But why these rains are so important to discuss is how dry it's been in this area. See this? That's where we're about to put flooding rains down, and that's why it's always a switch from very dry conditions to very wet that we have to be concerned about. We're also quite dry in pockets in Montana, although southern Montana has been the wettest. You come over here to like the Willamette Valley, up toward the Puget Sound, Seattle. This region has been quite dry, this spring as well. But I mentioned earlier in the week, California's reservoir system is currently sitting at close to 120% of average, which is going to be important for their upcoming growing year. So let's just do this real quick. Last 30 days, percent of normal precipitation, right? This is the country on the whole. I'd like to focus in on just a couple of spots if you don't mind. Let's just go have a look at the north central U.S., the Midwest, the Great Lakes. And I just want to make a point here that in the last 30 days, I've got some places in Nebraska that are down here in the 0 to 10%. Now, I only label, I've chosen a well-distributed bit of cities, although clearly I didn't do very well here. But you can still see a lot of these places are sitting at a fifth or less of their normal precipitation. And there's other pockets, right? I mentioned that corner of parts of Colorado, both here and here. You come into sections of Kansas. Look at the northern part of Illinois, Indiana, and parts of Michigan, southern Wisconsin, the same. So we just have to continue to think this through, because what we're hearing most about right now is the really wet spots. And I just want to point out that the opposite of this, so we're clear. You come down into the south central U.S., and just to show you how wet things have been, we do have pockets in through here that over the last 30 days, see these deepest shades? They're in this 600 to 1,000% of normal. So over a 30-day stretch, we have several places, in pockets, I should say, that have been so exceptionally wet. Now you can see the edge of the Mexico drought, though. See it right there? So this extends into Mexico, even though the data product from NOAA does not. But that's where it's been so dry. Meanwhile, right here in this part of the Red River Valley, some places 300-500% of normal precipitation. That's 5 times average over the last 30 days. Okay, again, what's been driving this? Where's the narrative in the story? So let me just show you the upper level patterns since the end of April. That's what we're going to do here. This has been an interesting feature. We've had repeated cutoff lows that have come through this section of North America, while the main jet, this lives way up here. And that's why if you're not in one of these cutoff lows, the temperatures have been quite mild and you've been dry. These lows are notoriously difficult to predict, which we've had a discussion about. And as they move through, they're more of a symptom of what the atmosphere is up to. So let me give you another example. If we were able to connect these cutoff lows to the broader jet stream pattern, in other words, I'm just going to draw over this, if there was a trough here that connected to cold air, then we would be talking about just tremendous amounts of widespread rainfall, a very, very active spring for everybody. And as a result, this would be also a much, much colder spring. And instead, these little features just keep meandering through. And that's what's causing, I think, the difficulty in the prediction. Now, you can also see, if I just show you the jet stream behavior. So that's the jet. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If we get into summer, and I'm still talking about the jet living here, okay? These cutoff lows, like the one you see over Southern California, they don't move. they don't come across the country. They tend to sit and spin in this area and die in the mountains, meaning that if we get into a situation where the jet is northward shifted like this, and we get these cutoff lows on the west coast, they keep the west coast a bit cooler. Now, it's still hot. It's still a hot summer in the west coast regardless, okay? But we keep these features around, and we start to develop major symptoms of drought in the central United States. All right, that's what typically happens. And then that leads into a hurricane season that has to just juggle the positional movements of the Bermuda High in order to see if systems can form and move into the Caribbean or Gulf or along the East Coast. Again, a narrative we're going to continue to talk about in the coming weeks and months. But that right there is what I'm going to be watching most carefully as we go through the rest of May into June. Okay, so just tuck that away in the back of your head. Where does it right now? Okay, so let's just take a look at it. Next 15 days from the AI model, the jet is living here, there, and then you've got this really interesting, there's an omega block that's in the, over Europe. So very cold conditions in and around the Black Sea, north of it here. We're going to have very wet conditions across the southern part of Europe, very hot and dry farther to the north. So this is what happens when the jet displaces itself north early. It is more prone to getting into these stuck configurations. So I'm talking about the presence of that ridge now, the presence of this ridge, and then this omega block. This seems to be quite consistent in the weather forecast models. Now, speaking of the forecast models, in a absolutely baffling turn, the GFS, okay, look at this, was down here 2, 3, 4 days ago when we were making a big deal out of this, showing skill scores of like 75%, 76%. And in the last 3 runs, it is now back up to matching the European. And I do not know what's going on. Now, on Monday, I said, is it a data assimilation issue? I don't know. Or is it a staffing issue? In other words, the people that have to continually, for lack of a better word, massage the model to make sure that it functions. There's a whole team that does that. I questioned if there was something that happened to them, right? I don't know what's going on, but man, GFS, just look at this. There it is. It's back. Now, does it stay there or do we drop out again? But I wanted to report that to you just for consistency. And again, I want to thank Dr. Maui for letting me use his graphics here. So let's use it. All right, let's use the GFS and its ensemble and get a good look at this. I appreciate some of your comments lately. Some of the folks are like, hey, I know the GFS has issues, but it's been nailing it for me. And I don't disagree with it. I tend to favor the European, and the reason for that is just the statistical performance. I have nothing against the GFS, and I want nothing more than for the United States flagship model to be invested in, to become, to take over. I love the model. But let's now watch what its ensemble is doing. So take a look at this. There's the low that's moving into the southeast throughout the rest of this week into the weekend. That's going to create all of the wet conditions into the southeast, but it's kind of folding over the top, almost giving this ridge that's going to run over this low. That's why we continue to see very dry conditions on its backside. Now that's Friday. Getting into Saturday, Sunday, Monday. See, I didn't move. It's just sitting there. So what does this do? This just keeps this whole region on the exit side of that trough, which is why we tend to see such wet weather. But then this came out of the North Pacific, and that is the low that we're going to talk about next week that's going to come through the northern plains after going over the Pacific Northwest. And I want to know how deep it gets. So the GFS by next Wednesday, the 14th, has a relatively broad trough here. And this would just set up this region, everywhere that's kind of inside that to possibly deal with a low that ejects out. Now, could that set up a severe weather corridor to the south? Yes, as long as there's something to open up moisture here. What we're curious about is, does the trough that's leaving scavenge that moisture? Meaning that we're going to get more of the chances for precip farther to the north where the forcing is better, maybe less to the south. But that's a pretty pronounced trough. Now we're 10 days out in the forecast. This is now on May 17th. And the model ensemble average washes out stronger signal. Do you see that? That always happens with these ensembles. So I'm going to take a different approach into week 2 when I get out a little bit further in this forecast video in just a few moments here. But let's just kind of get a good look at where this is going to take us. Now, we know there's the trough sliding through the south. So today's severe weather risk tomorrow and then getting into the day on Friday. But I wanted you to also see the CPC excessive rainfall outlooks. You can see them shifting from today again to Thursday into Friday. I want to compare the models pretty quickly here, GFS left, European right, remembering that the new GFS skill score is now higher. By the way, I got a question. How do they make that skill score? What they are doing is this. They're getting a forecast 120 hours from now, right? In fact, they're doing this a little differently. This is not just North America, it's global. So they're taking this, there we go. They're taking the 5-day forecast for just the Northern Hemisphere from the model. So let's kind of get us out there. Sorry, I've got a bit of a slow internet connection in the hotel this morning. And what they're attempting to do with it is 5 days from now, they're going to look at the height pattern, and there's going to be a correlation. And the skill score comes from how well the model matched up the trough ridge pattern for the Northern Hemisphere. That's what that skill score is. So it's not a skill score on did it get the precipitation correct in your backyard. It's trying to match the pattern. So that's where the GFS just made a major recovery. Okay, so now back to the models. GFS left, European right. Watch the precip forecast through Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. Now you're going to notice that late this week, this is just going to stay consistent here. So where are we? Let's take you back. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Look at that. Did you see that? Just watch the southeast, if you will. That's all the way out to next Tuesday. Just a continual opening of the Gulf moisture into Florida, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. Why? That upper level low isn't moving anywhere. Now, meanwhile, a little system skirts to the north along the U.S.-Canada border into Ontario. And then we're going to watch on May 11th and 12th for that trough to come into the northwest. So that's the next one. So while this one sits and spins, we're waiting on this. We're going to get some really windy conditions early next week in the northern plains out ahead of all of this. But I'm questioning if we're going to get the moisture return behind it. So the low comes through, and it's going to bring in some snow to the Cascades, Central Oregon, the Blue Mountains, getting into the Rockies. There's going to be some snow at very high elevation here. And then that system's going to eject. Now, here's our question. By next Wednesday, when it comes through, is most of the moisture here, like we talked about, or do we build this down? The fact that this system goes through and high pressure doesn't immediately replace it, you've got to build in high pressure behind this to open up the Gulf for the next system to use, and it doesn't. So we just say it scours or scavenges all the moisture. And that comes racing through, which means this system will likely be pretty far to the north. Now, I'm going to show you something. It's way far out there in the forecast, but when we look out there May 15th, both of these models on their backside have got enough cold air to drop some snow. Is it in Canada or is it in Montana and the western Dakotas? I don't know. But that's the look we have from this next system coming in. Again, it's going to start late this weekend and take all the way to Thursday to get out to this point. Very, very slow moving system. So given that as the setup, let's take a look at some of the precipitation forecasts. And I'd like to start you off on the dry side of things. So over the next 7 days, who has the highest chance at staying under 1/10 of an inch? It is the western Cornbelt, northern, upper Midwest, parts of the northern plains. It's this section of Texas along the Red River that desperately need a break. Mexico stays dry. The Southwest stays dry. But you'll notice that as I add more time, that takes you out 10 days, these areas shrink because of the system that's coming through. Let's flip this over to 1 inch. Sorry, I just got a new model run in. Let's go back to the previous. That's the 10-day probability of getting an inch. Now watch. Remember when I told you that system's coming in? It starts next Sunday on the West Coast. And then by next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, see it opening up into the northern plains, Canadian prairie, increasing the rainfall chances in this area. But as you noted with me earlier, the wettest conditions are down here in parts of the south and east. And if I just showed you the 10-day probability of an inch, here's 2 inches. Here's the probability of 4. So right now the European model is very aggressive, a 50 to 70% chance of over 4 inches of rain into an area that's been so very dry. Okay, but as we look out there, this is 7 days from now. Trough in the European, trough in the European ensemble, trough in the GFS, trough in the AIFS, and we already looked at the GFS ensemble. So that's there. That's a pretty consistent feature. We just see the models ripping that through the northern tier of the United States. And then what I'm really curious about is out here Friday, May 16th, the depth of this trough east. And I'm going to show you why in just a few moments here. But that trough coming through is why we see the week 2 forecasts all showcasing some sort of event here. My question is how much of it builds down into this area as some of the models are trying to show getting out there into week 2. That's going to be a difficult thing to forecast. All right. So you can come to the website anytime you want. Slide down here, click on the day 8 through 14 precipitation anomalies, and keep a close eye on these. You can also just run the models yourself. But thinking that through, that trough feature, okay, over the next 7 days, we do have some frost risk, and it's around the Great Lakes. Now, this is not uncommon for early May, but this right here is something we need to quickly chat about, because the cold temperatures are trying to come in by tomorrow. Not tomorrow, by Friday. You see, the probability on Friday morning of having a temperature below 40 is relatively high in this area. Very warm behind it, but we still have Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, Northern Indiana, and Michigan with the probability of getting below 40. Now, this is not a frost probability. I can show you that. That looks something like this. It's not quite. We could be talking about a frost here. All right, but remember, when I make this map, my threshold is 35 degrees. So all I'm doing here is I'm taking the National Digital Forecast Database minimum temperatures it predicts every day, and if it is below 35 degrees Fahrenheit, it's gray. Now you go, why 35? Well, you know that when you get down into the mid-30s, you have low-lying areas with cold air drainage, and if there's clear skies, you get this strong radiational cooling, and you can hit it. You can drop those temperatures down. So that's what my map is. But let's go ahead and have a look at the actual temperatures, okay? Tell you what, let's do this min temperatures. There we go. All right, so here is today's minimum temperatures. There's tomorrow, and there's the first trough that comes through this area. So see how chilly we're getting in this region? See a lot of 34s and 35s, okay? After that, we just warm it back up pretty quickly. Watch Saturday into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Look at the warmth coming back in here. Now, I'm going to flip back to the max temperatures. So here's today's max temperatures tomorrow on Thursday, Friday. See the cooler air here? As one low exits east and another one slides into the southeast. Hot west, hot north. That's Saturday. I mean, 90s in eastern Montana, 72 in Amarillo. Like we've done that comparison multiple times this month. That is Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Now, you know what's going on next week. That's when we start to see this feature coming in and setting itself up to open this region, right? We talked about that. So to show you that, I'm going to show you the 5-day swinging forecast here. 5-day kind of a sweep next 5 days, but I'm going to take you out. Here, let me rephrase this. Here's the next 5 days. I'm going to slide us out to day 5 through 10. There's the trough. See it? And then day 10 through 15 looks something like that. Now, this is the area that I'm a bit concerned about. Because I mentioned after the 17th, 18th, and 19th, there's in some of the models a trough in here. And I'm going to show you something. I just decided to go out and pluck out Fort Wayne, Indiana from this new system I'm working on for you. And I want to show you their temperatures. Now, this is just the soil temps in red and the air temperatures in black. Okay, I've got them grabbing 158 GDDs coming up soon, but you can see the warmth rebuilding into the weekend and early next week, and then all the way through the end of next week. But this is that 17th, 18th, 19th time frame where the temperatures are dropping back down. I don't have them getting into the frost, but I just want to mention we've got the possibility out there of some colder air, so we need to watch it pretty carefully. Okay, that's 2 weeks. We need to think hard about the way that the end of May and the beginning of June may shape up. So let's do that as we finish out this video. I'm going to take you to some severe weather discussion here. I find it interesting that the GFS supercell composite starts to show a little bit higher values here into week 2. Now that would be the time frame when the low comes into the northwest and tries to get out here. Remember that we've been talking about. So there's some chance of that occurring. The only way that this is going to increase for this area is if we can get high pressure to build in here to open up the Gulf to transport some moisture and therefore instability. But later in the month, we're looking at some forecast models attempting at reviving an active pattern. And I've got big question marks as to whether or not that can occur. I've seen multiple, forecast simulations that are trying to open this whole area back up to a lot of severe weather, but then they fall apart the next model run. So speaking of model runs, let me show you what the newest outlook is from May 10 to June 10. And we're going to look at 2 models versus the GFS. Now, you know that these subseasonal models are very, very biased toward the first couple of weeks, right? So whenever you look at a month-long forecast, what's generally represented is the next 2 weeks. So we know that this area is going drier. This is going to be wet. That's been the mainstay of the conversation so far. We know there's a low coming in here that's going to open up this region to wetter conditions. But the model's attempting to keep the southern plains quite dry all the way out to June 10th. And it's not just the GFS. This is the GFS extended. It is also in the European ensemble. So let me now show you the European. Oh, sorry, wrong click. Let's go here. There we go. I'm going to show you a 30-day precipitation anomaly, and let's get the same time frame. That is, there it is. That is May 10 to June 10. So there is some consistency in the forecast models, but we are still lacking, other than just noting that the momentum is still very low, right? This has been a major discussion point. We are still lacking any sort of a strong signal from some other feature, be it mountain wave torque coming off of the Himalayas, or some big feature driving in the North Pacific, or a change in the MJO position. I mean, you've seen this, right? If I go to Ag Weather, show you the more weather tab, look where the MJO is just stalled. This is not something that many of us can just use to make a strong case for where we're going to be getting a big push out of the tropics for something different. It's muddled, and that's what makes it challenging. So then we know that we got new seasonal forecast data, like we're looking at the chance of ENSO going in one direction or another through the next several months. And the new European model forecast from May 1st that goes all the way out to November has a massive spread. Now you say, well, what do you think? Well, when I think about this, I think we're going to be seeing more behavior here than versus the top part of this distribution, which is weak El Nino conditions. I think we say ENSO neutral and flirt with maybe the return of a weak La Nina by this upcoming winter. Now, my confidence in that is terrible. I've got to see more. I've got to get past what's called the spring barrier in forecasting to know what's going on here. But what this means is our La Nina scenario is going to play not just second fiddle, but probably just be put in the back row to this. Now, over the last month, as we've watched deep cutoff lows live here, what have we noticed? The ocean temperatures have gone colder and colder in this area. There's your La Nina, the end of it. We're waiting to see, as you know I've talked about, cold water here, 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 and here. If we maintain this kind of arc of cold water, that is a recipe for central United States ridging all summer. And we end up troughing west and troughing east. And you get what you've heard a ton about in the news, an omega look to the pattern all summer. So what I'm drawing again is what needs to happen in order for that to occur. But Matt showed you the new forecast yesterday from the ECMWF, and I'm going to show it to you again. I'm going to make a very solid point about this. He told you something quite important. There are only, in my research and my studies of this, I have found that there are only two variables that show statistical correlation that is useful to do prediction and that is useful in understanding model forecasts on the seasonal timescale going into summer. Does that make sense? And those two conditions are ocean temperatures and soil moisture. Ocean temperatures and soil moisture. So what does this mean? Because this is right now the most dominant signal hugging North America. We call this region our PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode. It's a measure of the pressure and the ocean temperatures in this region, and it's very negative right now. And I want to show you this. If that stays negative, the jet stream pattern in summer will feature troughs of low pressure here and here. With the Bermuda high shifted, the Pacific high shifted. That's the Pacific high, there's the Bermuda high, and in the middle, we plant high pressure somewhere in the plains. So the jet comes over and around like that. And the model was just initialized with this region getting colder and colder for the last month, especially the first few days of May. So if you want to know why the European model has got dryness in this area, it's because it's attempting to plant higher than normal pressure here, leaving troughs there and there. So what does this do? This tends to give us an active southwest monsoon. It tends to give us more unsettled weather in the southeast. And it tends to give us hotter and drier conditions in the central U.S. And that's why the precip pattern looks like that and the seasonal temperature pattern looks something like this. So I'm trying to explain to you why the models look the way they do. Matt talked soil moisture yesterday. I'm talking about the ocean temperatures today. So where do we go? Well, we're waiting. We're waiting to see if anything else changes in these ocean temperatures in the next 40 days. And if we get the complement to the negative PMM, which is the negative PDO, we talked about that last week. If this goes cold and this goes cold, I really only have one time in recent history, going back to 1960, where it was cold here and cold there. Okay, cold here and cold there. And we had above trend yields in the midsection of the country. Just once. All right, that was 1972. So that's the story we have to make, okay? All right, I mentioned I'd tell you something about the globe going forward. I wanted to show you the temperature pattern first. You see where the block is keeping things cold in and around Ukraine, Russia, parts of Eastern Europe. Must watch that. Globally, in terms of precip, that was a slow load, sorry. This is what the next 10 days looks like. So as I mentioned, quite dry here, wet across the south. Still quite active in India, parts of China. So look at the flip-flop in the model here. That may be the Mayu front setting up, I'm not sure. We have some tropical activity going on as well. The Brazilian monsoon is done. Wetter conditions in late autumn here in parts of Argentina, southern Brazil. That's been a drought area that's getting some forecasted rains. But that's all I got today. I will talk to you again on Friday. Matt will pick up for me tomorrow, and we'll just chat soon. Thanks.